Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Education Committee meeting. It is a few minutes after 6, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. One quick announcement that has nothing to do with the topic of this meeting. I just have to give a shout out to my hometown team that won the World Series last night, the Kansas City Royals. Anyway, now.
I object. Let's go, Mets.
Anyway, do we have minutes, correct, Brooke?
I submitted them to the committee electronically.
Okay.
Paper copies here if you would like.
So if anyone has any corrections, we'll get them to you. Dr. Wheeler, do you have any announcements or communications?
There are no announcements this evening.
Okay, so let's get right to the business of the meeting. The first topic on tonight's agenda is Dr. Wheeler is going to talk about the community forum on restructuring that is coming this Thursday.
This Thursday evening in the forum room at 7 p.m., we will have a community forum on the proposal for restructuring 9th grade for next year. We will be doing a presentation, but I think the more important aspect of that evening is going to be the Q&A that will be available. So we will be meeting in the forum room downstairs, 7 p.m., and we look forward to anyone who has questions. Please come join us, and we will answer all of those questions, I anticipate.
Thank you. I hope, just to echo that people in the community who have questions that are remaining or thoughts about the plan come to that meeting, and this will be the opportunity to discuss them.
Dr. Ludwig, while I am presenting, may I briefly do an update for the committee on the task force to study potential restructuring and realignment?
Yes, please.
Thank you. As I've mentioned several times in previous meetings, I have had an opportunity to review the recommendations and the findings from the committee, the task force that met during the 2013-14 school year. And I would just like to take a moment to review with you all the final slide from the very comprehensive presentation that was made to the Board of Directors and the community on June 11th, 2014. The concluding statement of that report offered a recommendation with several caveats, and I quote, "While the task force's formal recommendation at this time is in support of the status quo in regard to the current grade configurations, concerns were raised by the task force regarding the potential impact of increasing class sizes. The district will have to exercise caution as well as foresight in carefully studying and monitoring future enrollment projections, facilities, reports, and the overall tax base of the district to assure that the current configuration is most conducive to meeting the educational goals of the district." So to that end, we are reconvening the task force for exploration of potential restructuring realignment options. We will meet on December 1st. The task over the next few months is going to be to review the research findings of the original task force. We are not going to redo the work. We're going to review a summary of the findings that they garnered from the research that they investigated. We are going to have an opportunity to review the updated district enrollment projection study that came through following the work of that committee. We will be looking at the recommendations of the capital improvement study conducted by Dewey Engineering, again, a report that was presented to the district following the work of that task force. We're going to review the current use of space in our schools. We're going to review the potential impact of the current residential development projects in the township. As you may know, if you're following all of that, there are several developments that are underway with shovels in the ground over the next several years. So we will be looking for an update, and we hope to bring someone in from the township for that piece. We also will look at the financial impact of any options explored by the group. This will not be an open-ended process. We are anticipating that we will come to the community in the spring with an option or options that this group will recommend, and we will move forward from there. We will turn it over to the board. So I understand there's some concern that the board has made a decision. That's not true. Late last week, I was able to send out a letter of inquiry to the participants of the former task force asking if they are interested in continuing. Many folks have said they would. Some have indicated that they cannot. They no longer are able to devote that time. So once we compile that and see where the openings are, we'll be reaching out to community members, and we will get a well-rounded group. And again, we anticipate that we will begin this work early in December. So I will keep the board informed as we move along, and thank you, Dr. Ludwig, for the opportunity to share this information.
Could I just ask a question about that?
Yes.
Will you be publishing a schedule of what topics are going to be covered at what meetings so that people, in addition to those on the task force, can come to listen to the meetings that they're interested in?
Yes, we absolutely will do that.
Okay.
We have, as I said, we have several discrete topics. Our intent is to move along at a convenient pace for everyone, but still keep the work moving. We want to get this done again by the spring, but we certainly will publish all of that information, and any updates we will share as we're moving along. I think any documents that we investigate, we will certainly post on the website.
Will there also be a mechanism for members of the community who are not on the task force to give their input? I mean, something like a forum like we're having on the
Well, that is what we
restructuring?
intend to have happen at the end of the process. What I would like to do is have the task force, when we convene for the first time, talk about ground rules and what the norms are that we will adopt, and to do that as a group moving forward. But certainly none of these meetings will be held in private. They certainly will be open for folks to come in and monitor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to topic 2. And is it the case that topic 2 and 3 are going to be combined and discussed as part of the same presentation? Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. And we have a brief PSSA data presentation. And what I would like to say around that brevity is that our entire complement of data is yet incomplete because we are still anticipating the release of the school performance profile for our high school. With the new PSSA scores that I'm going to address shortly, you'll also understand that the Pennsylvania Department of Education has declined to produce a school performance profile for elementary or middle school, and we will be doing a full data presentation in December with all of our scores, including disaggregate data and other elements of data. So for tonight's presentation, which will be briefer, it is simply sharing our PSSA data for grades 3 through 8. So I'd just like to begin with the letter from our Secretary of Education, Dr. Pedro Rivera, who shared with us that a number of things have happened also for board and community members. There's a letter that is in the back that explains to parents exactly what happened with our PSSA scores, and I do believe that letter has been shared on our website as well as through our buildings. But very, very briefly, in 2013, new PA core standards were adopted in the area of English, language arts, and mathematics. This past spring, students were now expected to complete a full complement of testing under the new, more rigorous PA core standards. And as a result of that, across the state, there was quite a decrease in PSSA achievement. So as we move forward, Dr. Ritzula is going to give us a look at our English language arts data, and I will follow up with our mathematics data.
So, thank you, Ms. Morrison. I wanted to share a couple slides before we get to our data that just further informs the board and our community about how the new cut scores were developed. I think it's important to recognize we have an ELA curriculum renewal committee, steering committee, that has 52 people on it. Right, and at the end of that, I still suspect that people will come to this podium and say, Dr. Ritzel, you didn't have enough voice, right? There wasn't, somebody was not represented in that. I share that because in determining the cut scores that were used to determine advanced, proficient, basic, and below basic levels, there were 58 members of that committee. Right? We have 52 on a reading committee. The state had 58. When you look at the slide presented, what you'll realize going down the left margin, third through eighth grade, when you move over to the proficient column, you'll notice that the score that students have to attain to be proficient is 1,000. Right? And I do wonder what's magical about 1,000, right? How is that determined? How is that calculated? What's the logic in it? And I'm sure there is, but the range of scores is from 600 is the lowest score, minimum, your maximum score is 2,000. You'll see that the proficient threshold is 1,000 across the board. And there are different levels when you look at basic, 905, 887, 893, and when you move over to advanced, the numbers are up around 1,100 and above, but it differs. And so what's really important about this is to realize the cut scores were established after the children had taken the test. Right? People knew what they had already scored before they determined this. And so the next slide here shows applying the new cut scores to the scores, the raw scores students had achieved and what was already known. If I could take that slide and turn it 90 degrees clockwise, you would recognize it's a bell curve. Right? So there are very few kids in the red, below basic. There are very few kids advanced. And you have 66% of the kids clustering in the middle, which is a concept we have tried to move away from in education for several decades. Right? All means all. NCLB was supposed to be the high watermark. We're going to help all kids by challenging and supporting them. Kids took a test, they overlay new cut scores, and reestablish a bell curve in reading. So that being said, we saw a decrease in our scores, and we're still trying to figure out the extent to which that decrease was a result of new assessments, new standards, or new cut scores. But here's some points of pride. All 4 elementary schools in Sandy Run Middle School averaged at least 90% proficient in advanced. Right? And so the principals have been asked to share some more building-specific data at their PTO, PTA meetings. But here what I could say to you is despite the fact, new tests, new standards, new cut scores, we're still celebrating over 80% in each of our elementary and middle schools. It's obviously well above the state average. And we did talk with some of our peer districts, the districts we like to kind of hold ourselves up against in competition. And we knew over the summer that our results were going to be similar to theirs, if not a point or two higher in some areas, a point or two lower in others. But the reality was we felt like when we saw the decrease in the scores, we got nervous. And then when we talked to some of those colleagues in other districts, we took a deep breath and said, okay, together we're going to have to figure out what this means. We also started to look at it by grade level. And so from the curriculum office in reading, we wanted to see how did 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade do across the board, same for the middle school. And so what you see here is that from grades 3 through 8, when you look across, and we're going to do a deeper dive in a minute, we scored anywhere from 81 to 88% proficient. So this slide is tough to see. I know it's in the packets at the table. But what we did is we looked at grade level. We broke the kids out. How many kids scored in the advanced, proficient, basic, below basic, and looked at the percentages. Putting our results up against the state average, which is what you see in red, isn't really helpful. In Upper Dublin, we're expected to far surpass the state average. And we do. We nearly double it across the board. But there are a couple numbers that are of interest in this slide, and I'll just speak to them. In 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade in the advanced category, we have 27% advanced in 3rd grade, 37% in 4th grade, almost 37% in fifth grade. I think that's really important to recognize that a third of our elementary school students are scoring in the advanced range. In a hardcore program that's 10 years old, right, is limited in its implementation with fidelity. And so we're trying to improve that, right? But a third of our kids are still achieving at the advanced range in that category. At the middle school, it continues, 36%, 36, 31%. About a third of our kids across the district are scoring in the advanced range in ELA. I would ask you to move to the basic column. And so if we advance these kiddos 1 year, our fifth graders are now sixth grade. Sixth grade moved to seventh, seventh moved to eighth grade. What you see is 33, 31, and 35 students who are in the basic range. Right? So with the new cut scores, we have about 100 students who scored basic, right? Students we would consider at risk. That's a really important piece of information for the ELA Curriculum Renewal Committee because we have to make sure we have the supports in terms of resources and materials, also in personnel, to make sure that we can give kids the extra supports they need. In the below basic column, we don't have a lot of students, but the 12 and fourth grade is something that we're continuing to monitor. Okay? So I think what this slide says is we feel pretty good about the fact that we have a lot of kids in the advanced range despite all the changes, right? But we also recognize that we now have 100 kids who moved into the middle school or have been in the middle school that we want to make sure we provide them the resources they need and deserve. So the next slide just shows the overall percentages advanced proficient by grade level. As we mentioned, we're between 81 and 88%. And we also included the range. And this is really important, again, for the ELA Curriculum Renewal Committee because when you look at third grade, we score anywhere from 75% students proficient in advanced to almost 92%. That's a really large range. That speaks to some potential inconsistencies, right, in the way we're implementing our program. Same thing happens in fourth grade, 75 to almost 90%, 80 up to 92%. This is an indicator that we don't have consistency across the district. So a third grade in one building is not performing up to another. And before anybody panics, it's not as though this is, you know, the low range is germane to one building and the high range is another one. There's pockets right across the district. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Morrison to talk about what the impact of the new cut scores did in mathematics.
So again, Dr. Gritzula referenced the cut scores, and you can see the cut scores in the thousands for proficient. Same committee number of participants who determined this after students were complete with testing. And I think this is probably the most important slide of the presentation. There was recently an article that suggested that by having these kind of cut scores, which if you turned it on its side would not be a bell curve, instead it would be a curve that it was suggested in the article was manufactured to fail students. If you think back to English language arts, students around the 40s are proficient. And then you look at mathematics, and suddenly in sixth grade, it's students 60% or above are considered proficient. So you have this entire band of students who are not passing. And then it's 65, and by eighth grade, it's 70. So we're not sure how these cut scores and this distribution was determined, but you can see how it has potential detrimental effects on our students in Pennsylvania. There are still things to celebrate, however, even with that last chart. Last year, we implemented our fully aligned PA core curriculum in grades K to 5, as well as softer roll-in in elementary school with half the grade 6, half grade 7, and half grade 8. And with any new curriculum, there is always somewhat of what we call diplimentation, or there would be a dip, and yet we didn't see that. When we looked at our results at the grade 3-5 range, we were between 71 and 74%. And again, when we compared notes with our peer districts, we were in range, just like with the ELA results, a point above, or 2 points above, a point or two below. So we're very, very pleased that in our very first year of implementation, to a very different, much more rigorous kind of curriculum that I do believe stressed our system, the curriculum held true, and we still got results that were as good and sometimes better as our peer districts. Not only that, nearly a third of all of our elementary test takers were advanced in the area of mathematics. You can see a similar chart to the one that you saw with reading, English language arts. Again, grades 3 through 8, we have a significant number of students who scored advanced. However, we also have a significant number of students now, remembering that the cut score to be proficient is so much higher in mathematics than it is in English language arts. We have quite a number of students who are below basic. That is new to our system. We've never had to face this. And also who are basic, and that is also new to our system. So I would say that as we move forward, whenever we look at scores, we think of them through 4 different lenses. We look at scores through the curriculum lens. So we know that we have a strong curriculum in place. We look through scores through an instructional lens. We've been working very closely with our staff through our Chrome initiative and differentiated instruction, professional development. We look through assessment. What do our assessments look like? Are they rigorous enough? Do they match some of the PSSA assessments? And then we also look organizationally. How many minutes are devoted to a subject? What kind of resources are around a subject? What are our practices? And I would say with this high number of students who are basic and below basic in mathematics as we move forward, some things we need to continue to consider is how to differentiate in mathematics for students both sitting in below basic and basic as well as students who are advanced. And we need to think about how we can provide interventions for students at all levels and what kind of resources we have for those interventions. Again, this is a summation of grade 3 to 8 in mathematics. You can see the band here, perhaps not as great as we saw in English language arts, and our range. And you can see as our scores continue to get more difficult to attain proficient and advanced, our scores do fall. And you can see right here in the state of Pennsylvania, only 30% of students were able to pass the mathematics exam. So with that, I'll move on to science. Our elementary middle school students performed well, averaging over 90% proficient and advanced in grade 4 and over 80% proficient and advanced in grade 8. And again, informal conversations with peer districts, which is corroborated through the sharing of data by the Pennsylvania Department of Education. It's been in some newspaper articles, but we have competitive results, and we're pleased with that, although we want to make sure that we continue to grow and increase our scores. And that's a summation of our PSSA 2015 science results in grade 4. Quite a nice number of students advanced. Grade 8, also again, close to half the students scoring in advanced. And then finally, our score range. So with that, I will leave it to the board with any questions or comments.
When do we expect these data to be formally published and available so we can actually see how we stack up?
I believe the data is already available on the Pennsylvania Department of Education website.
Okay.
Recently released.
I have a question about how well parents understand what has changed and what this means for their children.
I do know that principals at our elementary and middle school were able to share the data, and we did share information from Pennsylvania Department of Education. There's a letter that's available and was in the back regarding PSSA scores, a letter to parents, which I believe was shared both at the building level as well as through our own website. And I'm not sure if there is any principal who might want to comment regarding parent questions, because that is not something that I frequently encounter.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions from other board members?
My first question is a little cynical. Basic. If basic is not basic? I mean, if you're basic, there's a problem, because they say proficient and advanced. So how do they define basic? Why do they use that term, and what does it mean? Sounds like basic or below basic, you're not achieving. Is it just differentiating the level that you're not? So you're not really basic.
If basic's to be interpreted as a positive,
Right. Right, so it's not.
not by their definition.
Okay, it's just weird. Okay, then I have a real question. My real question is, I want to make sure when we see this presentation next month that we are compared, not to individual schools, obviously. I don't want to know exactly Wissahickon. I can look up and see what Wissahickon did, but we need to be compared to a group of schools and where we fall within a group of schools on all the levels.
You mean in Montgomery County for?
Montgomery County, right. So 6th grade math, which is bad, but, how bad? It seems to me that that's probably for us, I think it was the worst. It might be the worst PSSA level. But where are we with the other 6th grades in the district? And because when I did my informal analysis, we did really well at Sandy Run. Amazing scores. I'm excited. I can't wait for the presentation where you show how we did in Sandy Run. But there was I saw one weakness at Sandy Run, which, we need to explain what it is. And our other elementary schools, I think they did very well. There's always one outlier, it seems, in my analysis. So I want to get down to that level and start talking about it. In December,
We will be making a full data presentation in December. I think it's also important to, when we look at the data, and we certainly pore over it, that it is 1 year worth of data, and it is very difficult to ascribe too many things to 1 year of data. In the past, we've always shown the longitudinal charts, how we've done over a 10-year period. That's when you're able to look at trends. So I do hesitate in being able to explain precisely what happened with just 1 year's data set.
right. And unfortunately, we can't compare last year, so we can't see how our grade and our grade plus one, how they did moving forward. It's almost like we stopped, and now we're moving forward again. Just kind of disappointing. But just the concept that you said, they're setting it up in a normative assessment. I mean, it's going to be the bell curve, but I thought with NCLB, everybody was supposed to be proficient. So I don't understand the change of logic with that too, because here they want to get that third deviation, the second, there's people who are going to be basic and below basic all the time. So it's not going to be AYP. We're not going to ever reach 100%, and it's not the intent to reach 100%, according to the state.
I mean, I am sensitive to the state's vision, which is to take a look at our assessment, and when you have many districts like ours, where students were regularly performing in the 90% and above, it begins to question how rigorous is that assessment. And is it possible that our students could grow more with more rigorous assessments? And so I understand why the state produced more rigorous assessments, because we live in a changing world, and I think we do believe more is required of individuals who are becoming adults in the 21st century than ever. I do have some questions, however. I think Dr. Gritzula also expressed those around how the cut scores were determined, and also how those graphs were determined. I mean, why is it that there's a bell curve for English language arts, but it is in the area of mathematics in 8th grade, students who are scoring less than 70% are basic or below basic?
I'd also be curious how they converted the raw scores to get those numbers. The 1,000 has to be some kind of a conversion of the raw scores. So there had to be some analysis, some mathematical procedure to convert raw scores to whatever these numbers are.
I actually think that is the raw score. So the way by which they calculate the points to get up is, right, how do you calculate the raw score is really critical. I would just
Okay.
add one more thing that's of intrigue to me, having been a principal at a school that was a Title I school previously. One of the things that we're learning as we continue to talk with our peers, schools that are Title I, either targeted assistance or school-wide, tend to be coming up shorter than other buildings, right? And so we know socioeconomics can matter. It doesn't have to be the determining factor. And yet here we are in an assessment that is just further reinforcing that issue. So we're going to continue to look at that as well.
If I may add, just as an aside, this afternoon, Mrs. Morrison and I attended a meeting at the MCIU. It was a listening tour by the PDE, and they are seeking input from districts on how they might change the SPP. And perhaps, and I'm really hesitating if I should even say this publicly, but one of the things that they are entertaining is moving back a little bit from the state test and perhaps adding some more impact by locally administered assessments. So this is quite an interesting world that we are in right now. 1 foot in one canoe, 1 foot in the other. We are all puzzled by what happened with the cut scores, why those decisions were made after they saw the results. They then developed the scales for the
Right.
cut scores. It just doesn't
kind of
make a lot of sense. And by the way, we all were to be 100% proficient last year when
Right.
NCLB was
Right. Yeah, that's
2001, when
what's
that was
bizarre.
adopted. So it's quite an interesting world.
So what are they doing with PVOS? Because even though the last year's PSSA and this year's PSSA are totally different, couldn't they still do a PVOS analysis?
So that's an interesting question, and we will be addressing that question when we do our full-blown data presentation. However, the Pennsylvania Department of Education has issued a correlation. So they are now looking at growth relative to the results of all students who took PSSAs this year to see where students in Upper Dublin fall in relationship to that. I do believe, though, that is a reason why the state is also not determining a school performance profile for K-8 buildings. So while the PVOS continues, I think the state realized, the Pennsylvania Department of Education realized that we can't determine school performance profile on those PVOS figures. So I think, again, we're still not 100% understanding and maybe convinced what role those PVOS scores play, particularly in light of the new PSSA results.
If there is some way to normalize scores, if this is what the state is going to do, I don't know if PVOS, I don't know if I understand it 100%, normalizes the scores and then projects from past. Maybe they can't do the projections from the past, but if you normalize the scores against everybody who took it for that particular year, can you then make comparisons from last year to this year? And maybe even in our own data, can we make some comparisons? I'm not sure how good they would be.
So I think the easiest way is to think about where a kid or a school scored last year, where their position was last year, and they're looking this year saying, did they hold that same position, right, when you look across the spread, right? So it wouldn't necessarily show whether they grew or not. It just is an indicator of whether or not they held their position.
So, one other comment that I heard at the Pennsylvania School Board Association, which is in answer to Dr. Levinowitz's first question, was a way to use the colors to describe the four categories, which is red is rotten, yellow is yucky, green is good, and blue is better. And that was from someone who was at North Penn who was presenting. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Thank you, but don't sit down. The the next presentation will be on the curriculum summit that occurred last week. Was it last week?
So I'd like to do a brief presentation to update the board and the community on our curriculum summit. Just to review that our new curriculum review process was adopted by the school board in the spring of 2014, and it provides an opportunity for ongoing celebration, evaluation, and revision of our curriculum. It's much different from our old model where we were on a 7-year curriculum renewal cycle, and what we found was in today's changing times, every 7 years to take a look at a curriculum really wasn't enough, and that we needed to be able to evaluate, to revise, to respond to curriculum on a yearly basis, and that we needed to have a curriculum renewal process that would allow for a K-12 look at curriculum. When you can think about curriculum, you can think about it vertically, K-12, as well as horizontally. So the next bullet point is that in addition to taking that K-12 look, when we get everyone in a room together and start thinking about what's going on in our district in terms of curriculum, it also much more easily lends itself to interdisciplinary considerations. And then another very important function of our curriculum renewal process is that it allows for budgeting as people bring forward curriculum needs for the following year and helps us to allocate our resources accordingly. So today I'm just going to do a brief update more around the accomplishments in different curricular areas. And then as we move through the year in the Education Committee, we'll have different departments come and give us a more detailed look at everything. So I'd like to begin with our K-12 Reading and English Language Arts, also referred to sometimes as RELA. One of the most exciting things that's happening is that we are doing a K-12 English Language Arts review. Dr. Kritzula referenced it, and we've had a very successful beginning thanks to the leadership of Dr. Kritzula, along with our consultant, Dr. Barbara Marinac, who's quite an expert in the field. And just wanted to share with you these 5 points that as we move through the English Language Arts Review, we want to understand what we do really well in terms of instruction and learning. We want to be very sure of what our personal and district goals are around English Language Arts instruction and learning. We need to deepen our understanding of PA core English Language Arts standards in reading and reading and writing, and also across content areas, because one of the big shifts in emphasis through the PA core is that we now understand that all teachers are teachers of reading and writing, not just an English teacher, but a biology teacher, a social studies teacher, that students don't come to 7th, 8th, 9th, or even 11th grade necessarily understanding the fine details of how to write a social studies paper or how to read a biology article. And so part of every teacher's job is to help content area understanding in those areas. Ultimately, the English Language Arts Review seeks to identify what the strategic behaviors are that are embedded in our new, more rigorous standards. And by strategic behaviors, that will be strategic behaviors on the part of teachers in instruction and strategic behavior on the part of students in terms of learning. And then ultimately, we need to develop an evaluation criteria or framework for the consideration of materials and resources. And what does that look like, that English Language Arts Review, in terms of the K-12 continuum? We have a steering committee that's been meeting regularly. We have a K-5 action team where there is internal reviews that include learning walks, research and curriculum design. That is paralleled for 6-12, and we will come together at times to move the work forward, to transform our district into a fully aligned, rigorous PA core English Language Arts program. What are the current accomplishments for K-12 reading and English Language Arts? In the area of reading, a lot of work has gone on. We've had summer and fall curriculum work. We've been able to rewrite our 10-year-old assessments through Harcourt to align to the PA core. In middle school, we're using Newsela. If you haven't heard of it, Newsela is a fabulous resource that can be accessed, that has content area reading that's graded by level for students to access, and also can be differentiated according to reading level. And then finally at the high school, we put into place a 9th grade academic literacy course, which is for students who are basic and below basic on the PSSA. 5 days a week they receive instruction in reading, but they specifically receive instruction in content area reading. So 2 days a week, a biology teacher is present in the classroom, and together the reading and biology teacher look at the content, unpack the content in terms of reading and writing, and help students on a second time that day for biology understand the content. That also happens for students who are in social studies as well as in English. So that reading course is new, and so far by all reports it's been very, very successful for students. It's also a very specific way of supporting students who may struggle in a more difficult level class because of some issues with reading. Now they're going to get that very specific report. In 612 English Language Arts, again, we've been doing summer curriculum work. We have been working towards the PA core by back designing our curriculum, and we're in the process also of creating common 612 assessments. In 2017-18, for English Language Arts at the high school level particularly, there is consideration for the creation of new classes for student choice, that we will have back designed all of our courses at the secondary level, perhaps looking at some semester courses, and also looking to partner with local universities and colleges around our rigorous AP courses in English composition as well as in English literature. K-5 mathematics. Many of you are familiar with the implementation of our Eureka math program, and again, by all measures, was very successful in its first year of implementation. And we're continuing to support across the district with our district mathematics coach, who has been very busy modeling lessons. Today she had all of our kindergarten teachers in for professional learning to make sure that the understanding of the Eureka program continues. We've been partnering with Zern, which is a digital version of Eureka, and we believe that Zern is one of the ways that we can differentiate for students, both advanced and students who are struggling. And one of the things that we did last year is we created a very thorough process for placing students in middle school mathematics. 6th to 12th grade mathematics, and 99% of our students who took the Algebra 1 Keystone last year passed. It was our first year of Carnegie implementation for pre-algebra, and we were able to merge our very successful Sandy Run algebra curriculum with Carnegie so that students are exposed to some of the inductive foundational pieces in mathematics. And it's probably impossible to celebrate curriculum at all without mentioning Chromebooks, and the math department specifically is very grateful and has been using all sorts of new tools, and there you can see some of those listed there: Desmos, GeoGebra, Exitix, Kahoot, Pear Deck, Flubaroo. I have to tell you, with all these Google apps, I'm learning a whole new language. You know, you can Zern, you can Gooberic, you can Doctopus, and so it's really kind of amusing. We are looking at bringing a POGL workshop to Upper Dublin for math and science, which is a fabulous program that our math teachers are very excited about, that really puts students at the center of learning. And we were able to use ebooks for all of our computer science courses. So in terms of social studies, at the K-8 level, we have our new assistant principal, Mr. McAleer, who's present tonight, who has been thinking very hard about our K-5 social studies curriculum that we're just beginning to look at, compiling all of the standards and starting to walk through and discuss with our elementary teams where we are in terms of our elementary social studies curriculum. We discovered 2 years ago that we were doing it a little bit wrong at Sandy Run, that in fact we needed, according to state standards, to be teaching U.S. history before 1850, before students entered high school. We backward designed that course and implemented it, and now we're in the process of post-implementation, taking a look at it making sure that the good things continue to get better and some of the things that weren't there get taken out. We're looking at grade 7 as they begin to backward design their course. And then at the high school, because we had to move the US History Year 1 to 8th grade, we designed and implemented a new 9th grade course last year, which was rolled out this year, with a real emphasis on multiple perspectives, which as we are designing social studies, we're very sure to include multiple perspectives, that history is the story of many people. And I was personally very pleased to walk into a 9th grade social studies class and to see that multiple perspective work being moved forward with students through the use of primary documents. Additionally, the high school social studies department is creating common assessments, grades 9 to 12, to make sure that students have that guaranteed experience. And social studies department does offer 5 AP courses, and their AP courses always are significantly above the global average for all AP exams. K-5 science. And I would say in the area of science, we have done so much work over the last few years, and we owe a lot of that work to the dedication of Kim Small, who's our K-12 science coordinator. So this is the first year that we have fully aligned, teacher-designed, standards-based, both to the PA standards as well as the next generation science standard units that are implemented and supported this year. And we were very proud that when we were designing these, we had teachers from across the district. Actually, out of 24 possible teachers, 1 teacher from each building at each grade level, we had 23 teachers participate. And the beauty of backward design is not just that teachers are designing to the standard because they're the instructional experts. We also had higher ed professors working along with Kim Small to make sure that we had the content right. But what happens is when you get a group of teachers, for example, kindergarten teachers were in today, and they have a unit on friction. But if you ask me, or if you ask an average kindergarten teacher, exactly what is friction, they might have a hard time telling you. But if you get teachers involved in designing the lessons, they understand from the inside out what friction is and how to explain friction to a kindergartner. Because remember, our elementary school teachers aren't science majors, they're not content area experts. So backward designing provides professional development in a really, really powerful way to teachers. Our new science curriculum is fully uploaded on Google Drive, shared with teachers and administrators so that teachers continue to have input as they are teaching it, because we've designed it, but now that it's being taught, what does that really look like and what kind of feedback are we getting from teachers? One more unit to design this year. By the end of the year, we will have a fully backward designed, standard aligned, common assessment program, kindergarten through grade 5, which I believe is an accomplishment that may be the first time in Upper Dublin that has been that thorough and that well thought out. And it is today that it was our first ever elementary science collaborative led by Kim Small to do the kind of work I just described. Grade 6 science has been working really hard on a weather unit, and that is ready to go. And again, with that same detail to attention, forethought, because we believe that if teachers are thinking really hard about curriculum, then students will think really hard as they encounter it. And you can see that grade 7 and 8 have established a curriculum scope and are now beginning to do that backward design work. At the high school level, a very high percentage of students in biology passing the score. It's over 50%, so with our 8th grade PSSA science, 44% of our students were advanced. They moved from 8th grade science to 9th grade biology. Now we're in 50% advanced, which is really high compared to the rest of the state. We have very competitive results, both regionally and in the Science Olympiad and Science Fair competitions, sending students to Penn State for the state competition each year. We have significant AP course offerings and a very high level of student performance on science and AP exams. And we are the only high school in Pennsylvania that has a geoscience curriculum and is accredited by a 4-year university as well. In fact, Dr. Rick Schmidt, who teaches that course, was just at a national conference this weekend presenting to his higher ed peers on how to get students excited and interested in the geosciences. And finally, we really have a significant number of high school students who complete 5 and 6 years of science instruction before graduation by doubling up on science classes. Again, as the Education Committee continues to meet, we'll have much more specific updates from department areas. And I welcome your questions or comments.
Comments and questions?
If I just may add, another value added of the Curriculum Summit as we are honing that process is getting very, very well-developed input on budget development for the following year. Because as the content specialists come in and present, they are addressing what has happened, what we're working on now, what they project the future in their particular content area will bring us, but they also are providing recommendations for consideration for budget. So that's been very helpful.
Throughout the presentation, you were talking about backward design and aligning curricula to standards. Can you, I mean, I couldn't keep track by which ones are done, accomplished, and in process. Could you kind of summarize where we are in that?
In the area of science, kindergarten through 5th grade, we are 2/3 of the way finished with fully backward designed units as well as backward designed assessments in the and we are fully done in 9th grade Keystone Biology. I should say fully complete. In 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science, we're working on completion. I believe that in 6th grade, we will be 2/3 of the way done by the end of this year. In 7th and 8th grade, we will be finished by the end of next year. In English Language Arts, our 8th grade program is fully backward designed. Our 9th grade and 10th grade program are almost complete and will be complete by the end of the year. We're now focusing on 6th and 7th grade, though finished, what I should say is that we have completed unit plans that are aligned, that have assessments, common assessments, formative and summative alike, but that through the English Language Arts Review, what we haven't developed yet is a scope and sequence. So when are we teaching those units and why? And I do believe that we have some more work to do around scope and sequence in terms of writing as well. In the area of high school science, I'm sorry, I'm skipping around a little bit, we have just begun work on backward designing our chemistry course, and we'll begin working on physics, environmental science, forensics in the coming year.
Thank you.
I just have a quick comment. So Dr. Levinowitz, Dr. Ludwig, and myself were able to visit the Curriculum Summit, peek in, and just kudos to the teachers and the administration in terms of the synergy, the energy that was presented. It was great to see the teachers collaborate, work with one another, have a good time, even as others were being presented. My question as a response, as the two presentations are tied together, or if they are tied together, as the curriculum is being renewed and these summits are happening, does the curriculum department, I guess, have our belief that the net result will be an increase in all the PSSA scores as they correlate with one another?
We do, and we believe we've already seen some really positive signs for that. So when the PA Corps was coming, we were quickly trying to prepare for it. So 3 or 4 years ago, we began by specifically focusing on the Keystone exam courses because those are courses for graduation, and we were very concerned about students not being able to graduate. So 4 years ago, we did a pilot of the Keystone Biology test, which was, of course, non-binding, and our students did not do very well. We backward designed our course, and for this year's 9th grade students, we were really proud of how well our students did. Their PVOS growth scores were in the dark blue. Dr. Ludwig, dark blue is beautiful?
Better.
Better. better. And we also have been working really, really closely with our 10th grade literature class. And again, the increase is tremendous over the last few years. We've gone from the mid-80s all the way to, I believe this year, 91% of students were proficient and advanced. Although I have to say, with the caveat, it is a correlation, and that we can prove because we did that work that necessarily we believe that. And I think that over time, the test will really come out. And while I'm just discussing the Keystone exams, I do have to say one of the disappointments for us as a high school is even though we had really, really great high school Keystone exam results in 9th grade biology and 10th grade literature, we will not see the fruits of those results in school performance profile until those students hit 11th grade. So it's complicated anticipating what a school performance profile is going to be like because of that.
A little follow-up on that. Could you probably know this, but could you update everyone on what is the current status of Keystone exams as graduation requirements and use of PSSAs in teacher evaluations? I mean, the school performance, well, whatever it is.
So currently, the Pennsylvania Department of Education has not come out with an exact frequently answered question sheet around PSSAs and determining final teacher evaluation. Mr. Sigafus has been in touch with multiple members of Pennsylvania Department of Education. And even this morning, early this afternoon, when Dr. Wheeler and I were at the MCIU with the Pennsylvania Department of Education, again, they said they have not fully decided how PVOS scores and SPP will intersect for teachers teaching grades 3 through 8. The high school level in terms of Keystone graduation, and I really am pausing now because it's so complicated and I haven't thought about it in about 3 weeks, so I have to reach into the back of my memory. I believe that a bill was passed in the legislature that needs to now go back in front of by a subcommittee asking to postpone Keystone as graduation for this year's juniors. So we are in a holding pattern until the full legislature meets to pass that committee bill. And I hope I said that right.
You presented, for ELA, you presented a curriculum review roadmap which shows a steering committee and then 2 action teams, and then it comes back to the steering committee. Does that model apply to the other subject areas as well?
When we have curriculum reviews?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. So when we had our mathematics curriculum review, we gathered as a K-12 committee, broke off, 6-12, K-5, regathered at times.
And so what is the mechanism for ensuring continuity from 5th to 6th?
In terms of curriculum specifically?
Yeah, so if one, the concern would be that, we have a team focusing on K-5 and another team focusing on 6-12, and they're on opposite sides of this dividing line in the little diagram, so.
Well, not entirely. Together as a committee, we look at the K-12 PA core standards and the practices, the shared practices I referred to earlier. So that's a whole K-12 committee. We do break out at times, but it is a full look. And what would ensure the kinds of progressions you're talking about is a curriculum that adheres to the PA core. So if you're adhering to the PA core, whether you use Eureka in 5th grade or Carnegie in 6th grade, it's still, those progressions are very explicitly and foundationally spelled out through the mathematics standards.
Okay, thank you.
I have one other specific question. On one of your slides that had to do with math, you used the acronym POGIL, P-O-G-I-L. Could you tell us what that is?
I'm going to ask Dr. Mr. soon-to-be, hopefully, Dr. Vinogradov to help us with that.
So, having been a POGIL teacher for many years, I'm embarrassed that I don't remember what the acronym stands for. Sure. It's a.
That's fabulous.
but-
Hold on.
Process?
Process-oriented.
Yes.
Thank you,
yes.
Dr. Clark.
So, so POGL is, as Ms. Morrison pointed out, it's student-centered constructivist learning at its best, right? So you are essentially setting a stage for inquiry. It complements well our philosophy of backwards design, beginning with the end in mind, using driving essential questions, identifying the skills and content mastery points for kids, right? And then from that, what kind of assessment, what kind of experience. In POGL, the lesson structure is around setting that stage for inquiry, and then putting in place the elements that will drive that process. But students have a lot of ownership in identifying that process, reflecting on that process. So as they go through a sequence and that becomes their experience, they become self-directed and empowered learners.
Is that just math related?
It's a model that's used in math and science.
And I just want to follow up on Mr. Sirota's question. I think continuity K-12 is really critical. So even though you saw that slide where it broke out to K-5 and 6-12 for the ELA work, we actually were really hesitant to even talk about it that way, right? In a K-12 committee, the reality is that maybe it's not just K-5. Maybe it's a K-2 focus on some phonemic awareness and phonics that may not be part of what grades 3, 4, and 5 discuss and so forth. The work moving forward, what holds it all together is two things in particular. One is the development of a K-12 assessment plan and the development of a planned course document, right? And so I think what a lot of people are waiting for is an ultimate decision. Are we going with the program at the elementary school, right? What's it going to look like? Before you can even have that conversation, you have to know whether or not the materials, the resources that you're looking at are aligned to standards, right? How that progression is going to look K-12 as it moves up into the middle and high school. And then whether or not there's any kind of program out there that would really deliver on the kinds of things we're looking for to achieve. And so by and large, the people who have done this work before, there is no perfect program out there, right? And so you look and you say, okay, well, this program hits a lot of it, but there are some gaps, right? And you start to look at a planned course document to say, where are the gaps? So kind of over the next 2 months, the next 3 months, the work of the committee is to really decide in terms of curriculum documents, what holds it all together? What's the spine? Whether it's a scope and sequence, a planned course document, et cetera. And once we develop that, then we're going to look at an evaluation criteria to say, so what kind of materials and resources would help us get down or be able to deliver the instruction that we hope to provide for kids. So I think that's what will hold it together, and then ultimately we'll be able to come back to the board with a recommendation about what kinds of materials best support it. If it's a program at the elementary, so be it. I think that's where my concern is, that if we go with a program at a certain level, it provides the potential to have a disconnect as kids transition through. But we think the plan course document and the assessment plan and evaluation criteria will hold it together.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
Anyone else have any other comments or questions? Thank you. So, I think at this point the members of the committee have seen a motion, a couple motions that will be forwarded to the legislative meeting, and I don't know if anyone has any questions on them, but I'm opening the floor in case anyone does. They seem pretty straightforward.
I have
Do you have a
one.
question?
Yes. The NSTA conference is listed for Lisa Fantini. Is that the same? That's not the same NSTA conference that we sent a whole bunch of people to, or is it?
I believe it is.
Okay, so this is an after the fact. There was one more person who attended and we missed it. Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Okay. At this point, we'll now move to community input. If there's anyone who would like to make comments from the community, please follow the usual protocol.
Hi, I'm Lori Cagnoli, and I have children at the high school, Sandy Run, and Fort Washington. I guess I have a question regarding, if I understood that right, the biology keystone, it was 50% passing, and how that's going to work with restructuring, and also whether it's called restructuring or detracking. I'm not sure what the right term is now. But, for example, I have a very good friend whose son is a 9th grader struggling in biology. The parents, the family have met. The recommendation by the teachers, guidance counselor, is to move that child down to track 3. That's not an option for next year, assuming that detracking will happen. So I'm curious specifically, what will be different about next year that the guidance counselor, all the teachers involved, are not going to say, okay, move your kid down a level. So I'm concerned about that. And then relating to that, I kind of want to know if there are very specific details as far as what resources are going to be needed to make detracking be done properly, because if done well, it can be wonderful. If not done well, it can potentially impact all students involved. And if there is a number involved with that, and if the board will have that number before they have to vote on this next month.
Hello, Michelle Haggerty, Fort Washington Elementary. I just had a quick question. Dr. Wheeler briefly touched about the budgeting as we look forward to the curriculum changes. Our PTA has been asked on several occasions to provide reading support for our reading curriculum, and we're more than happy to do it. But I wanted to know, when you're going forward in budgeting, what is the protocol for these teachers as far as getting the support that they need for the curriculum? And, you know, where is the line where the school district should provide these curriculum support materials and where the PTA steps in? If you could just maybe provide a little bit of clarification as to what the guidelines are, if there's a protocol. You know, we just say yes. We're not sure if they've gone through other, you know, means to get the support that they need before they come to us. So if you could just clarify that, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, Tanya Colon of Fort Washington. I just want to thank Dr. Will and the board and the Education Committee for having the forum and the chance to speak and hear the information that's going on. I wanted to share with the comment, piggyback off the comment that one of the parents just made in reference to the 9th grade biology. Ironically today, and there was an issue at school where, and this is regardless if we have an honors kid situation where they took a test across the board, whether you're in honors or track 2 and perhaps track 3. I definitely know honors and track 2, and for 9th grade. And one of the teachers had made a comment. It started with the honors teacher making a comment across the board saying that the 9th graders did not do well for this specific test across the 9th grade class. With that being said, I couldn't say anything at the time because it wasn't my child with that class. Move forward today, my child who's in track 2, teacher just graded the class, test, excuse me, told the class, you guys did not do well. So when I heard this comment before, I said, why are they taking that on the kids and saying you did not do well? What you know, if you're saying across the board, it's not a teacher specific, it must be a disconnect somewhere. Then once my child who's in track 2, teacher said the same thing, I said, well, this is a problem. So I did send an email to the teacher that said, you know, I didn't mention other teacher's name, but said this is across the board for 9th grade with this specific unit. What is being done other than telling the students you did not do well? It takes away the kid's self-esteem, and it's not the student per se with this. And with that being said, I did get an email follow-up. And I did ask, what was the across the board, what was the class average? And then specifically with my specific teacher, what was the average for that class? And I did say she did get, and then what was going to be done? Were they going to go back, retest, reteach, and then retest or evaluate? I do want to say she did get back to me, and she did say, you know, great question. I did, sorry, one more thing to add. I did say, is this to me seems alarming and like a science department concern. And she did get back to me, and she did say that they are doing some different things, and et cetera, et cetera. So the point that I'm trying to make is, regardless of tracks, there's something going on with our science curriculum department, and that's just an example for the biology. And this is my student's a very high achiever, and to see this, which was atypical, but what hurts me the most is when she comes home in tears along with her peers, and they're all crying, and they're all teenagers. And I basically said, what's going on? They're like, they're just slamming us with information, not really teaching us. If they had to analyze it, it's just being given information too fast. So regardless of what track you're on, because it's coming from the honor kids and the track 2 kids, and maybe across the board, the information highway is just push, 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 not enough teach, teach, teach. And maybe there's not enough time. I don't know. I'm not one of the teachers, but I just wanted to bring that to concern. Also, I also see it with chemistry. I saw it last year. Not with the individual teacher. It's across the board with teachers, whether it's implementation or something. There's a disconnect within our science department somewhere, and I asked the board to please look into it, or the community. Thank you so much.
Jerome McGriff, Ambler. I was looking at the two documents, and there was a point raised that 99% of the students score proficient or advanced in the spring Keystone Algebra 1. Now, I'm assuming that that's based on the 8th graders that are on page 6 of the PSSA data presentation. But if only 21% of the kids are advanced, are we saying that 99% or a little bit less than 75%, 75 kids did this? Or the way it's written, it almost looks like 99% of all the kids in math achieved that Algebra 1 proficiency. I'm a little confused as to what the numbers represent, the 75 or 99 of 345, which doesn't match up to the data at all. Thanks.
Jenny Vitella, Ambler. My first thing, you asked about the parents' feedback on the PSSAs, and basically my attitude is like, who cares? Because they can't seem to get their act together in order for it to have any meaning. So it's like, my number comes back, my paper comes back, the description comes back, and I'm like, it's meaningless. Especially since last year with Fort Washington with the 80% because of 6 kids in science, it's a joke. So I just like it's meaningless. So as long as they get their 4s, I guess I'm okay. I hope. And I do on that line. And the other thing about the performance profile that also it seems meaningless to me is if those 4th grade kids are great and they move to 5th grade, it might not be necessarily that the test is harder or the teaching's good or the curriculum's good. It's just that set of kids happens to be a good set of kids. And those 4th graders coming in, again, it might be that set of kids isn't necessarily good, bad, or otherwise. So it's like comparing apples to apples, apples to oranges, right? 4th graders to 3rd graders, whatever. And my question also is, if there are challenged learners, will they always end up being in basic? And really, no matter how great the curriculum is, aren't they basically going to be in basic forever? And are those in those numbers? And I mean, I don't know how to say that without sounding non-PC, but are those children taking that test and expected to sit for hours for PSSA and in those numbers? I don't know if they are. And I wondered, I have heard from some that last year was the first year from the 5th grade with the Eureka going into 6th grade with Carnegie, if we've gotten any information about those kids transitioning. Because I have heard from some that it isn't exactly the same way of teaching, and it was a challenge for some to learn it for the first time, Eureka in 5th grade, and then go to the first time to Carnegie in 6th grade. So I'm wondering what you've heard feedback from parents on that. That's all. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Jerome McGriff again. I forgot one other thing. Are there any numbers for the kids who are in the district that don't have internet connectivity at home, considering everything is going Chrome? If you don't have that ability at home to connect to the internet, you're pretty much have a much smaller window of time to do your work, whether you're doing it at the library across the street or doing it in school. I'm wondering, has there been any research as to how many kids are even capable of using this new technology at home?
Any other people willing to speak? I think almost every community member who's here has spoken. So I guess we will try to answer the questions. I guess the first question has to do with what resources we have for struggling students or are planning with our restructuring.
Thank you for your question. I can't see you over there. Just as a point of clarification, 50% of our students who took Keystone scored advanced, and 80% were proficient and advanced. So it's actually a very high score. And in thinking back to over 4 years ago when we began taking Keystone biology, and I'm quoting this from memory, so I may not be 100% correct, but I believe our Keystone pass rate was somewhere in the low 70s, and it is now above 80%. So students do and can grow, and we believe that students do and can grow out of basic, and we've seen evidence of that. And I would say that we will be talking quite a bit about supports for our restructuring at Thursday night's meeting, but that there is a strong team of high school administrators along with special education teacher input that has been developing a plan for supports for students who may struggle in some of the courses.
Specifically, those will include additional. Thank you. Specifically, those will include additional co-teaching as well as continuing the specific training in differentiated instruction and assessment. One concern that I have, and I don't know if Mr. Schultz wants to address this, but I would be seriously concerned if a guidance counselor's response to a student struggling would be to recommend that they go into a less rigorous curriculum by moving down to track 3. Mr. Schultz, thank you.
As long as we have a lower track, if a student is struggling in a higher one, that is a conversation that is going to take place. So one of the reasons for moving toward a more detract curriculum is to eliminate that bottom level so that the supports have to be targeted right then and there, so that more of an intervention type of approach can take place and that the needs of the students can be met within the classroom. That's why we're putting so much time and emphasis into the professional development around that. 7, 8 years ago, when we had 4 tracks in biology, if a student was struggling in track 3, conversation occurred, well, should we consider moving down to track 4? So as we continue to raise the bar, especially by setting a minimum standard with Keystone exams in mind, we no longer have I'm going to call it a safety net, but I mean that in a negative way.
Right.
The safety net should be around the supports and the interventions that take place on time as needed.
In a more rigorous curriculum.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So another part of that question had to do with what the cost will be for providing supports if we eliminate a track. I mean, I know that, that what I have heard going forward, but I'd like clarification from the relevant people, is that rather than things costing more, there will be a reallocation of resources. But if, Dr. Wheeler, do you want to address that, or will that be something that comes with our presentation to the board or at Thursday night's meeting?
We do not have final numbers. We do need to, we are continuing to talk about how we are going to provide more co-teaching, and that's an ongoing discussion. The high school administration, Dr. Sandberg and I have been involved in discussions about that. There are just some decisions that we have to make moving forward. So we don't have firm numbers yet, but we have a bit of time, and we'll continue to have those conversations.
Is that something that will be part of what you bring to the board in December?
Yes.
Okay. I guess, I'm not sure who should address Mrs. Haggerty's question about PTA and reading support.
That is a question did you want to address that, Dr. Gutsola?
I'll do the best I can. So in the, through the curriculum renewal process, we make proposals that by and large fall into the district general fund account. So they're district expenses compared to building expenses. Whenever we adopt a new curricular program, it is generally a central administrative cost. So Eureka last year, for instance, first year of implementation, all those costs hit the curriculum office. As we move forward into year two, things like workbooks, et cetera, go to the building level. And so as we move forward in that ELA discussion, we are trying to make sure, one, whatever we adopt as we move forward, we'll have the fund for that through the curriculum office and the general fund. Costs do shift to the building level, right? And so part of what we want to keep an eye on as we move forward are consistency in terms of what kids have access to, what teachers have access to. There are two ideas that I think may fall on PTOs as I've been here for about 15 months. One is, what kind of software opportunities can kids access, things that might fall into intervention, and what kind of devices might kids get to access some of that on. So I don't know if that's the question from a specific nature. When we had an opportunity, the curriculum office met with Dr. Wheeler, Ms. Bray last week. I know they've also been meeting with building level principals. A lot of that discussion is around what are those specific building costs, right? So we have some consistency across the district in terms of what buildings are purchasing. We're also asking for a list of all of the different software applications, et cetera, that are in the system right now. Because as people continue to see some more advantageous software resources, things that are adaptive to the needs of kids, we haven't really taken a lot out of the system. And so there's probably some redundancy in that. Some things we're paying for we no longer need to pay for. So we're trying to whittle that away. And ultimately, we believe that the central office and the building level should be picking up the costs for the resources that kids need to access the curriculum. So we recognize that there are times that people are going out to the PTO, but if they're ancillary, it's not something that I think the district would say that is an absolute need. My experience with this has been, you could try and pay for 44 different reading programs, right? A district cannot support 44 different interventions and resources. And so I do think that over time the PTOs and PTAs need to bring those questions back through the principals, et cetera, to the education committee so we can determine what we really do want to afford. Because we know how this works. If one PTO puts it in the system, right, the neighbor down the street wants it 3 months from now. And so we have to be really careful that we can afford the things that we're putting into our system.
Another thing that we have been doing, and even working with the Education Foundation, is to ensure that any opportunities to fund software, hardware, devices, whatever, we appreciate offers of help from everyone. We're now funneling everything through Phil's office to make sure that, it's wonderful someone wants to donate a classroom set of iPads, but does that fit in with our overall system? So we're refining our system of requests, but specifically, PTO asked to provide reading support. I think that behooves a question, again, going back to the principals on what exactly is being asked of the PTO, PTAs. I'm not familiar with individual requests, but I think that's something that we will go back and talk to them about.
Can I also add, part of the question, I think, was about what's the process for educators to make those requests, and I think that is a really good topic for our next PTA, PTO leadership.
In January.
In January.
Yeah, we'll
to
put it
ensure
on the agenda.
There's some consistency around that.
I'm not sure if in the discussion of ninth grade biology we addressed Mrs. Cologne's concerns, and I'm not sure I really understood what the concern about chemistry was. Maybe you can address that. Maybe it was clear.
Mrs. Colon, I think I need some time to look into the situation regarding biology, and I'm not entirely clear on what your question was regarding chemistry.
So in both cases, you're saying there's a disconnect because if all students do poorly, maybe it's not the students, maybe it's something about the teaching.
Thank you for that information, and I would agree that when a large number of students are not proficient on an assessment, then there may be, that is definitely an opportunity to reflect on the assessment, on the instruction, both of those things, but I'd be happy to look into that further.
I think Mr. McGriff had one that was just a clarification question about the numbers.
So specifically in 8th grade, and I think Dr. Levinowitz was a little bit, I'm not sure if you used tongue-in-cheek. The Pennsylvania Department of Education makes all 8th graders take 2 tests, not all 8th graders. 8th graders in a Keystone Algebra 1 course must take the Keystone Algebra 1 exam. All students in 8th grade, slightly fewer than 50% of students, took that Keystone exam. 99% of them passed it. However, they also have to take the 8th grade PSSA exam. There is content on that exam that our advanced algebra students don't cover. And so there is a difference in how students perform on the 8th grade PSSA versus the for graduation Keystone exam.
Can I just muddy that slightly further? I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Keystone Algebra 1 test is also not given only to 8th graders. It's given to anyone who took Algebra 1.
Any student in Algebra 1, that is correct.
Yeah.
And that could be some far accelerated 5th, 6th, 7th graders, as well as slightly less than half of the 8th grade. Yes, it really is. There were 4 students, I believe, out of all of the students who took the test from Sandy Run who did not pass.
I guess his other question was in terms of internet access at home.
Sure. In advance of this initiative, we reached out to the Ed Foundation, and the Ed Foundation agreed. One of the things we can't do, we can provide families with information about Comcast Internet Essentials, which is a great program, but we can't pay for their internet access. There's a lot of complicated reasons why. So the Ed Foundation set aside some money to be able to provide that support for families, should they need it or ask for it. And then we worked with our guidance counselors. So in advance of the initiative, reaching out to families, letting them know, if you don't have internet at home, we can connect you with Comcast Internet Essentials. If the process is onerous or you can't afford that rate, the Ed Foundation is willing to partner and facilitate and make that happen. There were a number of families who I communicated with over the summer who said, oh no, I didn't know about Internet Essentials. Let me look that up. Oh, that's great. I can do that. And so we made that match. We coordinated with the director of North Hills Community Center as well, provided her with those resources and information. And she said that a few families took her up on the information, but that no one yet has reached out and said, that's great, but I can't afford it. Can the Ed Foundation partner with us? This doesn't mean that we have 100% connectivity, and there are likely families who are not connected. And so the best that we can do in that situation is leverage our relationships. And so the guidance departments and all the schools and the offices in all the schools, and probably most importantly, right, the heart of every school, the secretary, they all know, they all have the information, and they know the moment that they feel or find out that a family is not connected, reach out to me, and we'll work with that family.
As a simple follow-up, do you have connectivity reports? I mean, I'm in software as well. But what I'm wondering is, can you tell by, if you have 1,000 units out, can you say 1,000 units connect once a week outside of the internet address that's the school?
I mean, we can run those kinds of logs. I mean, we're not right now. I know that all the devices that we have out with kids are on all the time. I was actually tweaking policies right now in our content filter, so it's fun to see what kids are looking for. Really sad songs was, so there's somebody who's doing a project on really sad songs, and all the kids are working on it right now. Before Halloween, it was fantastic, right? It was just, how do I make this? How do I make that? You know, different kinds of masks. It was great. So it'd be interesting to dive deep into that data. And yet, I don't know what the payout would be for diving deep into that data as opposed to the payout that we get into leveraging our relationships. I would suspect that our penetration is very high, but there will always be those who fall through the cracks, but we have that net ready to step in right away. Yeah. So it's a great idea.
Do we have any sense from teachers that how many kids are, well, I guess whether you use a computer or not everyone will come to class having done their assignments.
Yeah, there is no app for that.
Well, I actually have been having that conversation with elementary and middle school teachers specifically, and what came out of those conversations is that there are always some students who don't have their homework. Teachers are thinking maybe out of a class of 25 students, for whatever reason, maybe 2 students don't have their homework, and it seems like even if the assignment is digital in nature, it's about the same. So that's just anecdotal.
Okay. Mrs. Fatella asked, well, I think some of her questions were comments or rhetorical questions, but at least one of them was a question that we can provide an answer to, which has to do with the transitions from 5th to 6th grade in math.
I spent the day on Friday with the 6th grade math team thinking about that curriculum, and they had just finished teaching a unit on fractions, and they did report that it was the best student showing of understanding of fractions that they had seen. So that's with 1 year of Eureka. There are some instructional practices in Eureka that are not modeled in Carnegie, and we did have a conversation about making sure that our 6th grade and 7th grade teachers understand the ways that students in the Eureka program, or multiple ways students are being taught to show how to solve problems. So there is that piece of integration, but in terms of both Eureka and Carnegie being a program that is student engaging and student centered and fully aligned to the PA core, that is definitely in place.
Did I miss anything?
Well, Mrs. Patella had one more. I think she may have meant it as a comment, but I think it deserves an answer, which was, will basic kids always be basic? And I think we should be explicit that the goal is certainly no.
All means all
Yeah.
is a term you'll hear a lot from the leaders.
And the goal is to be proficient,
At least.
everyone.
Proficient or advanced.
Or
I would
advanced.
say there's a misunderstanding too as to whether or not the kids who are basic or below basic are always those identified with special needs. There are several special needs kiddos that I know of that are sitting in the proficient and advanced ranges. And so the reality is we're going to continue to work really hard for any kid sitting below basic or basic. If they have special needs in an IEP, obviously they could get to 12th grade and graduate based on IEP goals, but we will always continue to try and advance them to proficient or higher.
Not every single student who's in special education takes PSSA exams. Some students take a PASA exam as well, or in lieu of the PSSA.
I think that's it. So I think we are adjourned.
Board will move to executive session.